Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next talk. Before we start, just a quick reminder about a couple of rules. So this talk will be recorded. If at any point you turn on your camera or use your audio, it will be recorded as well. So keep that in mind. If you have any questions during the presentation or after the presentation, please do not hesitate to ask them using Q&A feature here in Zoom, or I use our Slack workspace and specific channel for this talk, where you can also ask a question. If you attend this talk live, you can also ask a question in person, but please wait till the end of the presentation and just raise your hand. And now I have a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Mantha is the head of evangelism at Rasa. She has years of experience building machine learning driven products at think tanks, startups, and enterprises. Mady studied computer science and mathematics at Georgetown University. And today in her talk, she will discuss how to transform today's customer experience that leaves them disengaged and disenchanted into AI-first customer experience that drives us value. She will touch upon Rasa's open source conversational AI platform, its natural language understanding, and machine learning powered dialogue management that respond to customers' evolving needs. Mady, good luck, and I hope everyone has a good time. And now we can start.
Awesome, thank you. Well, hey everyone, great to be here. I'm definitely a little jealous that some of you are in Munich right now in person, as I can see the live stream there, just enjoying each other's company and having those, spontaneous conversations that make conferences so exciting, right? I definitely miss being on stage right now, walking around a little as opposed to sitting in this chair, but that's where we are. Either way, I really am stoked to be here, and I hope to join you, IRL next year. But I have to say before I start, the Techday team has been fantastic. They even invited me to join you in Munich. If I had better planned that, I'd probably be getting ready to have a beer with you right about now. But yeah, my name is Mantha, and I'm the head of evangelism at Rasa. I come from a product and engineering background, right? Like Amelia just said, right out of college, I worked at a think tank where I worked on probabilistic statistical modeling, back when machine learning wasn't as cool as it is today, but it was just essentially statistics. Academia was great. I learned a lot, but I definitely wasn't as smart as some of my friends and colleagues. So I left the think tank, I joined a startup, and I loved it, right? It was chaotic. I wasn't just doing research anymore. I was building systems and applying NLU and NLP in the real world, and I really enjoyed that. So since then, I've worked with several startups and enterprises building NLP-driven products, specifically conversational AI strategies and applications for companies looking to automate and streamline business processes, or even just elevate their customer experience. So today I want to talk to you about something that I feel passionate about, and that's providing superior AI first experiences for the enterprise. So we'll talk about Rasa's open source platform that allows companies to really control their automation destiny. We'll talk about its NLU and machine learning powered dialogue management that responds to customers' evolving needs. And then we'll also touch upon some best practices that focus on successful adoption and sort of high impact. So let me tell you a little bit about a trip, I took 2 weeks ago. I flew to Denver, Colorado to visit some friends. It was a 5-day trip. Colorado is a beautiful state for those of you that haven't been. My friends and I went on hikes. We went to good restaurants. It was a great trip. So I fly back home after 5 days. I land, I go to baggage claim. I wait for about an hour. My bag doesn't arrive, right? So I go to the airline office in the airport, and they say that my bag is probably in Denver. They took down all of my information, my bag tag number and all of that, and said that they would be in touch the next day. So I wait all day the next day. They don't call me. All right. I go online and I tried to look for a number to call. I spent about 20 or so minutes trying to find out which number to call. I call them and they said that my bag was probably going to arrive the next day. I call back the next day and it's the same thing, no bag. I call back on day 3 and they tell me that my bag is actually in LA, even though I took a direct flight back home to San Francisco. So finally on day 5, my bag gets here. It gets delivered to me to my house. And, I spent so much time trying to figure out what the right number to call was, then got put on hold each day that I called. I got routed to different departments because my bag wasn't lost, so I couldn't necessarily talk to lost and found. It was delayed. So I had to go through this entire ordeal of just getting my bag back. And so it's definitely not an ideal customer experience, right? And the problem is, my problem isn't unique. Customer service today is a maze. Customers are inundated with so many interfaces. There's a 1-800 number, although I'm not quite sure if what the number is for folks in Europe, but there's typically a 1-800 number. There's an FAQ page, there's email, mobile apps, IVR systems, and there's just so many interfaces that leaves customers confused, disoriented, and then just disengaged with the whole process. And the burden is really placed on the customer to figure out which interface to engage with, which number to call. And the burden is on the customer to figure out the language of the company too. I didn't know which department or option to pick. Was it lost and found? Was it misplaced? And so that burden shouldn't be placed on me or on you, right? And it's also challenging for companies to maintain or scale this type of service. A misrouted call is 3 times more expensive than a call that doesn't get answered. Think about that. A misrouted call is more expensive. So scaling multiple departments or, 5 different departments to service 5 different types of customer needs is also not scalable. So it's not ideal for companies offering this type of service either. And customers should really just be able to, go to a website, a chat widget pops up, then in their own language, in their own words, they're able to say, hey, where's my bag? Or I lost my credit card, or I want to transfer money to a friend. And it's really on the AI assistant to figure out how to help them. Because great customer experiences speak the customer's language. And so we should really be able to abstract away all of this complexity, of the organization, of these processes, and provide a single interface that customers or internal employees can speak to. And so, really that's where people first or AI first customer experience comes in. That's what it means. It means that we're automating these manual processes and allowing employees to focus on higher value tasks. So we make employee experience better. It means that we're elevating customer experience. Always on service and support means that you have instant answers. Or if you don't get those answers, you can just quickly escalate to a human that can help you. And in doing so, we're laying the foundation for digital transformation because technology enhanced service means that it's easy to see expansion opportunities at scale. So think of this really as your new digital front desk. Imagine as a company, you'd implement a concierge service for your customers so they're able to express in their own language, in their own terms, what they need to get stuff done. And lots of companies across all industries, across all verticals, from healthcare to financial services to retail and beyond, are already implementing this type of people first, AI first experiences. And so for those of you that want to know more about Rasa, Rasa is an open source conversational AI platform. So if you're a company or a team looking to build AI assistants, you'd use Rasa to make that happen. Rasa open source provides the foundation, the infrastructure foundation that's used by hundreds of companies. And I think as of today, we have close to 12 million downloads. So core developer workflows used by millions of makers. And companies use Rasa Enterprise because it provides support for multidisciplinary team workflows and federated development tooling that you need to work at global scale. So now I'll talk a little bit about, the open source platform and how we enable these scalable automated experiences, and then dive into best practices if you're trying to deliver these applications. So at the foundation, an AI assistant needs to be able to do two things. One, it needs to understand what you're saying, meaning it has to identify the intent, extract entities, and then it needs to respond to what you're saying. So if you're asking for it to do something, it needs to be able to perform tasks on your behalf. So it needs to do both natural language understanding and dialogue management. And Rasa uses machine learning to do both NLU and dialogue management. Specifically, we use transformer models for both NLU and dialogue. For NLU, we have DIET, or dual intent and entity transformer. It is a state-of-the-art, neural network architecture for NLU. It's one model that does intent recognition and entity extraction together. It's a joint NLU model. It's open source, so feel free to check it out and play around with it. And definitely feel free to let us know. We have a very engaged forum here at Rasa, and all of the developers in our community love sharing tips and tricks and sort of their experiences when they start playing around with this stuff. So prior to Diet, Rasa's NLU pipeline used a bag of words or non-sequence model where there was one feature vector per user message, right? It was a fast and tough to beat baseline, but now we've gone beyond it. And Diet uses a sequence model that takes word order into account. And so it offers better performance. So Diet is this multitask transformer architecture that does intent classification and entity recognition. It consumes one message. So if you were to say something like, I want to play ping pong, the intent there is to play a game, and the entity there is the type of game, so ping pong. So it spits out the intent and entities at the same time, and it can use any pre-trained language model in a plug-and-play fashion. So you can use various pre-trained embeddings like BERT, Glove, Convert, and so on. I've linked here, and I think we're providing some slides after this talk, so feel free to check out some content on YouTube that really goes into Diet, what it is. But feel free to also read the paper where we've discussed all of our results, but I just want to quickly go over a couple of high-level results with you today. So in our experiments, we tried 4 different types of features to pass into Diet. We used sparse features. We used Glove, which is, a word-to-vec model. We also played around with BERT. And then we looked at Convert, which is trained on conversational data from Reddit, from Henderson and co-authors in 2019. And so the data sets that we used for doing these experiments is called the NLU benchmark data set. I'm sure most of us here are familiar with that. As you can see, it's a pretty large data set. We also used ADIS and SNPs, but the focus of the experiments was on this NLU benchmark data set because it's the most challenging of the 3. So let's take a look at some results. The first thing we found is that even with just the sparse features, Diet outperforms the previous state-of-the-art. The previous state-of-the-art is the Hermit NLU model, which we just saw. The Hermit model uses Elmo embeddings. So there was a lot of pre-training that went into that model, and Diet outperforms it by nearly a point on the intent and entities without any pre-training, with just counting the character n-grams. Another super exciting result that we found was that not only does Diet outperform BERT when using BERT as the featureizer, right? Glove worked better in that scenario, but it actually outperforms fine-tuned BERT. So fine-tuning large-scale pre-trained models can be computationally intensive, to say the least. And it may not be as accessible to everyone because you need GPUs and an infrastructure to make that happen. It's expensive. But using Diet with just sparse features and Convert as the featureizer without any fine-tuning outperforms fine-tuned BERT. So this is using BERT in Diet and back propagating all the way through and fine-tuning all of the weights. And not only does it outperform it, it's also 6 times faster to train. So, I mean, if that's appealing, you can feel free to give that a go. So Diet does NLU, right? That being said, we maintain that intents are still not a great way to scale. So use diet, use intense if you're currently using that, but intense really aren't scalable. And that's because intents greatly simplify the world. Humans can understand sentences. I'm not saying something groundbreaking here, but humans can understand sentences that they haven't seen or heard before. So read the sentence on my screen. It says, Iceland's president admits he went too far with the threat to ban pineapple pizza. You probably know what I mean when I say that, or when you read that sentence, you kind of understand it, even though you may not have seen this sentence before. Or when I was telling you about what happened with my bag and my Denver trip earlier, you understood what I was saying, even though you probably haven't met me or heard that story before. And AI assistants aren't like that, right? Of course. And so we have intents to help address that problem. And what they do is simplify language understanding from text to a few categories. And not everything fits neatly into a category. So what do we do when that happens, right? On my screen now, you'll see just a conversation between a chatbot and a user. And the user says, I'm looking for a restaurant. The chatbot says, how about Chinese food? The user says, I had that yesterday. So I had that yesterday. What intent is that? It doesn't neatly fit into an intent. Or when I say something like, I lost my credit card, is my intention to replace my credit card? Is my intention to freeze my credit card? What's my intention there? It's not very clear, right? Because intents are, they simplify things too much. And that's what NLU models do. They look at a message and they try to classify the intent, and then they predict the next action. And so we recently released another open source feature called end-to-end learning. And it's a way for us to get rid of intents. And end-to-end is a dramatically different approach from other conversational AI methods so far, and it gives us the ability to move beyond intents. And what that does is end-to-end looks at a message and its context to predict the next best action. So I'm going to go back here, and as you can see before, Rasa used to look at the text. The NLU model would spit out the intent that would get passed over to the dialogue management model, whose job it is to predict the next action. But with end-to-end, we kind of take a look at, both the message and its context. So the context is, suggesting a cuisine. And so we take that context into account to predict the next best action. So that's not to say intents are going away. You can still use them, but use them kind of like rules. They're useful to help you get started, but plan to move away from them because like rules, they're hard to maintain and scale, and they don't really satisfy all of the edge cases. And you're inevitably going to run into edge cases when you build conversational systems. So that's how we approach NLU. And the second part of what you need is dialogue management. We talked a little bit about this, about how real conversations don't really follow the happy path, or users saying things that, a chatbot wouldn't encounter before or hasn't heard before. And so it's hard to predict all of the things that users say to chatbots. And you've probably experienced this before too, when you've talked to a chatbot and you said something and it couldn't understand and it kind of like crashed, or it said, hey, sorry, I don't understand that. Can you try saying it another way? So how do you handle that complexity? And of course you do that with lots of data, with training, and continuously iterating on your assistant. But our approach to this is also using transformers and addressing that a little bit better. So we use something called the Transformer Embedding Dialogue Policy, or TED, and TED has a predefined architecture. And here on my screen, what you see is what we call a story, which is a conversation path. And the setting is that there's a hotel check-in assistant, needs some information from you before it can search hotels and make a booking for you. And here you see a bunch of chit chat where the user is digressing or engaging in a conversation that doesn't have an outcome on the goal, which is to confirm and make a booking. And on this graph, you'll see that we've plotted attention or attention weights. On the vertical axis are predicted dialogue turns, And on the horizontal axis is the dialogue's history over which the TED policy attends. And we use a unidirectional transformer. So the upper triangle is masked with zeros to avoid attending to future dialogue turns. So this model learns which conversation turns to pay attention to and which ones to ignore. So it ignored most of the chit chat history and it started paying attention again where the user started cooperating with the assistant. And the user started answering the question about the hotel price range and number of people traveling and so forth. And that's where it started paying attention again. So you can add more chit chat or some other digression, because users will oftentimes, they will, ask a follow-up question or digress from the topic at hand and, engage in chit chat, or they'll issue a correction. They've made a mistake. Hey, sorry, that's not my account number. I actually want to do this instead. So they'll issue corrections. And so you still want the model, to like not pay attention to chit chat. You want the model to handle sub dialogues and answer follow-up questions, and then go back to the main task at hand, which is, whatever you want the assistant to do. So it goes back to look at the last relevant piece of information that the user provided, which is up here, and not a joke that they may have told. And it goes back to the conversation history at each step to look at which parts are relevant and which parts to ignore in order to make the next prediction. And because TED does this, it's much more equipped to handle unexpected user behavior. And so with a recurrent neural network with RNNs, which is typically how you do this, each of these inputs gets tracked and added, and then it becomes harder to recover if a user were to cooperate again. So our approach, differs in this way. We don't use RNNs, we use the TED policy, which we came up with as a way to untangle subdialogues and handle multi-turn conversations. So as you can see on my screen, that is what a typical conversation looks like. Users will do a bunch of stuff that you don't expect. And if you want to build an AI assistant that can really handle all of the things that users say, really handle multi-turn contextual conversations, then this is something you want to be thinking about. So all AI projects start at this stage, where there's a huge gap or delta between expected conversations and unexpected conversations, and that's too huge. And some projects never leave this stage, right? So in addition to handling unexpected conversations with machine learning, which we just talked about, we also have to handle this with data. And this is platform and technology agnostic, by the way. This is a best practice that you might want to follow regardless of the framework that you use. So really follow the process of listening to user insights and use that data to continually improve and evolve your AI assistant. Because, one of the best things about conversational AI is that users are literally telling you in their own words what they want and how they're phrasing certain things, right? It's one of the greatest benefits of conversational AI. And they're also telling you what features they want to use. So let's say you've launched a banking assistant and enough users are saying, hey, I want to transfer money, and that's not something that you've handled already, then maybe it's the data is telling you that, maybe users are telling you that that's a skill that you can include in your bot, that's a skill that you can integrate with. So listening to user insights and using that data to, one, really just add that data to your intents and conversation flows and make that better, but also listen to those insights to see what features you can add and eventually evolve your assistant. So we call this process conversation-driven development. It's very similar to test-driven development or behavior-driven development, right? CDD, well, closer to behavior, maybe not test, but yeah, CDD is a process of 6 steps. And these are not linear in any way. And you should definitely be thinking about, and again, this is a process that you can follow regardless of any framework that you use. And you should, it might make sense for you to think about how to incorporate this process when you're building and delivering AI assistants. So start by sharing your assistant with people as soon as possible. Don't wait for it to be perfect. It won't be perfect. Of course it's going to fail, and that's okay. It's okay for it to fail a lot in the beginning. So share with test users, with beta users as soon as possible. And when you do that, the next step is to start reviewing these conversations as they come in. Set up a ritual around this, right? Where you can review conversations every week or every other day, and make this step a core part of your conversational AI lifecycle. And then the third step is to annotate the data as you start reviewing it, tag certain intents or entities, um, tag certain synonyms for each entities and such, right? And then the fourth step is to really obviously test, test with this data. So run your integration and functional tests. Just like you don't ship any application to production without thorough testing, follow the same process for AI assistants as well. If you have a platform that allows you to run automated tests, then that's great. If you don't, then think about hooking something up to your CI/CD pipeline and running tests as part of your model lifecycle. And then track your assistant. Track how it's doing once you've tested it. Track against certain metrics that you may have outlined from the get-go, like accuracy and so forth, but also track certain proxy measures like a user not clicking on a certain button or a user not getting back in touch with support or something like that, right? So have certain metrics that you want to measure from the get-go, but also track, certain proxy measures and certain indirect metrics as well. Then, of course, fix things, right, based on your results, and push the model back into production, and then start the process again of sharing your assistant and going through all of these steps. And so this process is a great way to ensure that you're building things that users want, and you're also aligning with user expectations. So conversational AI, as you can tell already, is not that different from software development. Really bring the best practices like CI/CD and testing and iterative development from software development into AI development to ship AI assistants. So do things like continuously deploy updates to your assistant. Try to respond to market changes or user expectations or users evolving their needs and stuff, and make sure you follow continuous deployment. But then again, that doesn't mean you should be deploying every day, because don't just deploy for the sake of deploying. Speed can be useless without quality. So there's no value in really pushing buggy code to production at speed. Professional software teams use testing, CI/CD to ship software fast and reliably. So try to follow those practices. And like I said before, try to find a platform that supports writing and running tests as a core part of your AI development. Conversational AI won't work in a vacuum. It's not something that only data scientists or data engineers or developers can deliver. It's, the way that teams currently work in enterprises or in companies is that you get teams that are multidisciplinary. You have designers, you have the development team, you have subject matter experts, you have business stakeholders, really just everyone. So it's really important to integrate all of these team members with different roles and skill sets into a systematic and measurable development process. Conversational AI today looks very different from what it looked like 3-4 years ago, right? It's evolved from innovation projects or POC projects that were initially led by research units into something that is now led by a very interdisciplinary team. And enterprises are using conversational AI to ship mission critical applications more and more. So this requires a mix of skills. You need a deep understanding of the user, of the domain, and you also need the software skills to build integrations that exist within an enterprise. And you also need data science skills to optimize all of the models that you're using. So yeah, try to find a platform that allows multidisciplinary teams to do all of these things that are key parts of the life cycle. And essentially, I think what we're trying to talk about here is that a platform should really empower you to address the many faces of scale that you try to find. So try to optimize for accelerating time to value and not necessarily time to market. Just like how you shouldn't necessarily be deploying every day just for the sake of deploying every day. You shouldn't really be thinking of time to metric as a, or time to market as a metric in and of itself. Are you providing any kind of real value within the first few weeks or a month when you go to market? If the answer is yes, then you should really be looking at accelerating time to value. So, some things that you want to think about are there starter packs that can help you kickstart development? Can you work with a customer success team if you don't have the in-house talent? Do you have any kind of tailored launch packages? And features that allow you to really optimize for time to value. And once you do that, really start to think about achieving production success at scale. So how do you integrate with meaningful, enterprise integrations? If you're trying to build a help desk assistant, then it makes sense to integrate with like an ITSM system like ServiceNow. If you're trying to build, a banking assistant, then it makes sense to integrate with certain databases and APIs so that your assistant can not just answer questions, but do things on your user's behalf. And you can achieve way more value like that. Try to leverage, reusable infrastructure so that you could meet new opportunities across business units. Try to make sure that your architecture is performant enough so it can scale up and down to meet demand, right? So these are some things that I'm sure you're thinking about when you're trying to measure production success. And also find a way to measure customer success. So earlier we talked a little bit about having certain metrics that you want to track beforehand. So try to have a list of, metrics and maybe an analytics platform that can give you more insight into exactly how you're helping customers. Ultimately, great customer experiences speak the customer's language on every channel, and they really have to be powered by a platform that supports all of these phases of enterprise scale. And with these fundamentals and best practices in mind, along with a look into Rasa's approach, I'm sure we can learn from each other and build compelling experiences together. Uh, with that, thank you for sticking around and thanks for your time. I'll take a few questions now, but also if something comes to you after this talk, and if you want to get in touch, there's my email, and you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'm happy to answer any questions or chat about conversational AI. So thank you.
Mady, thank you for your very interesting presentation. And now we will go to Q&A session. So if you have any questions, just ask them directly here in Zoom or over our Slack channel, or raise your hand. Actually, I have a question because I also saw many forum posts that very often people interact completely differently with chatbots once they know that they talk to a chatbot. They use different utterances and they just try to hit the intents because they learned from experience that that's how many chatbots work.
Yeah.
So during training, does it always make sense to use the data from real conversations with human agents, or does it influence the system that it doesn't respond that well to this mechanical type of talking to a bot?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we've been conditioned by bad experiences with chatbots so that now we just say, I mean, I do that too, where I literally just say, speak with agent, or, problem with Bill or something like that. And that's how I talk to AI assistants. I mean, that definitely works because you're hitting an intent. And of course, I'm sure that'll be one of the main utterances that are covered with stuff like that. But we're only capturing a part of the customer base that knows how to interact with technology. And we're really ignoring the large majority of people that may not be as familiar with technology as you and I are. Or people like if you're building a voice assistant that have, my grandparents have thick accents, right? So if they were to just speak with Alexa or someone, I'm sure it's not going to be able to understand them. So one of the best things about conversational AI is that it's so natural to just gesture to an assistant or speak to an assistant to get stuff done. And so we should really be thinking about building inclusive experiences and using data, real world data from how all people interact and how all people speak in full sentences, in sentences that have more than one intent in that sentence, where you can say stuff like, "I want to pay my bill, but also can you help me with this situation that I'm having with my account?" And really be able to train for those edge cases as well. But yeah, I mean, at the very minimum, I would say that an assistant should be and is able to hit some of those intents. But we should really be training with real world data so that we could make the assistant more robust and reliable.
Mhm. Okay. Next question. You mentioned that you worked for think tanks, startups, and enterprises. How do those differ? Like, is the chatbot design experience different in a large company where you have like a completely different customer base, or is it similar? And in what ways they differ?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that depending on the use case, whether it's an enterprise or a small company, whether it's customer um, facing or internally facing, that is, one of the main areas where it could differ. Because if it's internally facing, then it's safe to assume that you would do more. You can train your employees better to speak with, one of your applications than you can train your customers to speak with an assistant that you put out. So for instance, if you have a banking assistant, you're using Bank of America or Chase or KBC or whatever, um, and you're just talking to your banking assistant, you haven't necessarily received training on how the assistant works. But if it's like a help desk or an HR assistant, then the assumption is you've received some kind of training. So that might make it easier on the assistant to solve some problems for you. If you have more users, if the scope differs, then you definitely need more training and more work goes into it. Larger teams have to work on it. If the scope increases, your user base increases, and so you're scaling up to meet not just more users, but more workflows, more questions, and more things that the assistant has to handle. And so you have different teams or larger teams working on that. So I would say it really depends on, or it really differs on the scope and on the scale of the assistant. And the larger the scope and scale, obviously it gets more complicated, and you have to maybe even thinking about having a multi-bot architecture where you have one main bot routing to several other bots, and the several other bots are very skill based or skill specific.
Mhm. And you mentioned that recently Rasa launched end-to-end learning as a feature.
Yeah.
And I wonder uh, how how did it influence, because there are already some applications in enterprise using Rasa,
Yeah.
and was this feature improving customer experience, or is it like too new to so was the shift like smooth, or and is it easy to like switch from like normal intents that we kind of got used to this end-to-end feature, or did you um, notice some hiccups by your users?
I think all good software is buggy. And I think all good software migration processes can be kind of painful. End to end is has been released and it's optional. So some of our customers are using it, beta testing it. Some applications of end to end may be in production, but it's too early to say that this is entirely better than what we currently have. I don't think we have enough data to make that determination at the moment. And it's again one of those things where end to end doesn't completely eliminate intents and rules. We still say you have to use intents, and we still say you can still use rules. Nothing has to be totally machine learning driven, because those rules and those intents are still helpful. But it's optional, and certain enterprises that are using Rasa have opted to use end to end. And overall, I will say that it seems to be working well, but I mean, we don't have enough data to make that determination one way or the other to say, hey, this is definitively better. And I don't think we can. At the end of the day, I mean, each use case is unique, and the way our customers use Rasa is also very unique and tailored to their data, to their use cases. So something that works for one customer may not work for the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a last question. So, what new features are planned for Rasa in the following releases? So, what you're up to in as a team?
Yeah, we have lots of exciting stuff planned for both open source and enterprise. For open source, we have, graph-based architecture that is coming up. We have more improvements to our integrated version control that makes it easier to connect to your Git and to continue to make updates to your assistant. On the enterprise side, we're coming up with a few exciting, low code and no code assistants for multidisciplinary team. So if you're a conversation designer or if you're a product owner, and you don't you still want to make updates to the assistant, but you don't want to write code, there's some really good low code support there for other roles as well. So exciting stuff coming up. I know we're going to do some announcements later this year as well. So stay tuned for those updates. And yeah, feel free to join our forum and follow us on Twitter, or just take a look at our Twitter if you want to follow along.
Okay, thank you one more time, Mady, for exciting presentation. And if any of you has any questions, we will keep the Slack channel open, so you can as well ask them later. And here we're gonna wrap it up. And yeah, thank you for your presentation and for your attendance.
No, thanks so much. I had fun, and then have a great evening, everyone.